Hello YouTubers, today I'm going to be showing you how to change out the rear control arm bushings on a 2005 Mazda. Now I believe many of the close year models of the Mazda 3 will have a similar process and a similar bushing, so this may apply. First thing you'll notice, I'll have the side of the car jacked up, wheels off, and the wheels are chalked just to make sure it doesn't fall back or roll back on us. Now, if you actually look up inside on the rear control arm, you can see the bushing at the front there, and the rubber is pushed up in behind. It's essentially just sitting inside the ring. So there's no longer any rubber there, and hence the noise that I'm feeling and the change in ride suspension as well. The first thing we need to do is remove the brake itself off of the wheel, and there's these plastic caps that cover the back of the caliper. You're just gonna pop those off, and inside of that you're gonna use a 7mm hex end wrench to take both of those out, one on the lower and one on the top end. With those bolts backed out on the top and bottom, the next thing you're going to do is pop off this spring here. Now be careful, because it may want to pop out, it may want to fly out at you. It's got a little bit of a load behind it. Well, I wasn't successful in getting the spring off the front of the caliper, but instead I just pried it off the rest of the brake. And my next step is going to be just taking the back of the brake off. There's two 14mm bolts holding it on the back side, up at the top and down below. So I'm going to back those out, and then I'll be able to pull the rest of the brake right off. With the brake off, the next step is going to be to take this plastic shroud off so we can get full access to the rear control arm. Now, there's a couple plastic retaining screws or retaining clips that you're going to need to take out, one of which is along the outside of the car, and the second one, it actually doesn't need to be removed so much as it's pushed in, and you can just gently pull that one out once you get the other bolts out. To remove these bolts, you're going to need it's a 10mm socket, and there's one towards the front of the car and one that you're probably going to need an extension to get at around the back side. With that plastic off, we get a better look at the front of the control arm, and you can see how the bushing has been pushed right out of that ring, and this control arm is essentially free to move around and rattle, and that's what's causing the noise. To get both of those bolts out, again, you're going to need your extension, and you're going to need your 17mm socket to get them out. With those two fronts off of the front of the control arm, we have the four main bolts that are holding basically the rest of the unit in place. Again, you're going to need your 17mm socket. They're welded on in the back, so you're not going to need to hold them on the back side. The first one is on the front, to the front of the wheel, and directly behind that one is the one on the rear. Above that is the third one, and there's the fourth one, which is around the back side and right on the back side of the shock. Again, they're all just screwed in from one side. You don't need to hold anything behind it. The back side's welded, so don't try and turn those. It'd be pretty difficult. There is also one tiny little socket here on the side which holds the brake cable in place, so you're going to want to take that off as well. One of the things I've done to make this a little easier is hang my caliper up out of the way with a bungee cord, just so it doesn't get damaged, doesn't fall, doesn't kink the hose at all. Easy fix. Once you get those four bolts out and that small one holding the brake cable in, it's using the 8mm socket. This the side here is basically just going to fall to the side. Okay, now be careful because inside you have a plug that you need to take out, and you disconnect that by just reaching in on the left hand side. There's a little tab that you push in, and that should slide straight off there. Okay, with that, there's one more little plastic pin to disconnect, and then the unit will come right. Control arm free, we're able to see that this bushing comes right out on its own. The ring's still in place, however the bushing is completely shot. It's also a good time to just quickly inspect your remaining bushings that you have in here. Everything else seems to be in good shape and in place. With the control arm off, the first thing we're going to do before we get carried away with taking that ring out is, again, just scoring that line where the bushing sat. Now with this particular bushing, there's lines on the side, and if you look at my new bushing, it also has those same lines and they correspond. So I'm just going to make sure that I score the line with a file along the side here to know exactly where exactly where these bushings should line up. Now, getting this ring out can sometimes be the hardest part of the whole job. It's going to want to stay in there. Obviously, there's a lot of corrosion. It's going to be seized in there. It's difficult. I'd like to start with a screwdriver and just see if I can't pry away some of the edges, and just pry inside, peel it inside. Obviously, making sure that the wide side is on the bottom, and you're not trying to push the wide ring side through. Instead, you're popping it out the way it went in. If that doesn't work, you can also take a reciprocating saw or a metal chisel and just try prying in there, being careful not to damage the control arm itself. So you're just prying on that ring here and all the way around until it pops out. Okay, due to the magic of YouTube, I was able to remove this ring within a fraction of a millisecond. I cheated a little bit, and I used my reciprocating saw just to score, actually cut through most of the side of the ring, and then I had it pressed in with my screwdriver, just kind of bent it in, and it came out pretty easily. I also soaked a little WD-40 on there first, for a few minutes, just to let it kind of soak in there, and it actually came out fairly easy. And speaking of easy, now comes the easy part, because what I'm going to do is take this to my mechanic along with the bushing, and I think he's going to charge me about $25 or $30 to press that bushing in, because I don't have a press and it's not going to go in without one. Well, I've got the control arm back from the mechanic that pressed it in for me, and did a pretty good job of lining it up according to my score marks there, along here and along there. This one looks a little off, but I must have probably assuming I made a bit of an error there in my scoring, but it should be close enough. Hope anyway, keep our fingers crossed. Now when it comes to putting the arm back in, you're going to want to use a slightly different process than when it came out. And what you're going to want to do is start with those two bolts towards the front of the car. The reason being is if you leave those till the end, you're going to have a really hard time pushing the whole axle forward to line up those two bolts. So it's best just to put them in loose to hold it in place, and then you can. It's a lot easier to move all of these smaller arms individually to line everything up. And again, I don't tighten everything up until I get them all in place and the bolts through a little bit. Another helpful tip is just to put your socket driver on the end, and you can have one hand free and kind of spin that while you use your other hand. Obviously I can't use it because I'm filming, but use your other hand to just kind of manipulate this arm to get the other side of the bolt threaded in there. Makes it a little easier. So I've got all the 4 bolts along the side and on the top here, and also don't forget about the back one on the rear shock. Also got the front 2 tightened up around the bushing. I guess it's essentially the last little bit is just putting the brakes back on, putting all the wires back together, and sticking the wheel back on. And pat yourself on the back and have a beer and congratulate yourself for a job well done. So the part that I'm using for this job, I got it off Amazon for about $30 or $40 a piece, is the Moog K2000064 bushing kit. So you obviously gonna have to order 2 of them, do both sides if you're gonna do both sides. I think the job in total took me about 6 hours for both sides, maybe a little more. Obviously the second side goes a little quicker, but probably 6 hours realistically. It's not a fun job, it's not a pretty job, but it did save me a lot of money. I think I was quoted about $1,100 or $1,200 to do the job, including parts and labor. Good luck.